Thank you, Your Honour. Commissioners, before the lunch and adjournment, there was an objection to a question that I asked you, Sister. I'm not going to press that question at this time. Instead, I'd like to return your attention to tab 27, just briefly. And this is the press release that we've spoken of already before lunch. And just so that I'm clear, it's your position that this press release, you can't recall the ways in which Father Lucas was briefed, other than the provision of the report that is at tab 26. And it's certainly not the case that you can recall whether or not any of the language in that document can be attributed to you as the source.
I can't recall any of that language being known.
Can I take you to tab 50? You mentioned, Sister, just while that comes up, you mentioned that during the life of this document, which you didn't use, you had occasion to redraft it. Is that right?
We drafted press releases which used some elements or drew upon some elements, yes.
Is the one on the screen one of those?
Yes.
You say we, do you mean persons other than yourself or just you?
I usually worked with our leadership team at the time.
Right. So is this document that you see before you dated the 8th of September 1995, so a couple of years after the press release was first drafted by Father Lucas, is this a document that you drafted?
Certainly drafted under my authority. I can't remember how much I actually contributed and how much perhaps somebody else contributed.
Is this a document that you would have drafted in consultation with the Leadership Committee?
Certainly would have gone past them. I don't know exactly who put it together.
Right. You'll see at the bottom of the media release is your name and a contact number.
Yes.
It's certainly the case that this press release, when it was drafted, you would have known what was in it.
Yes, certainly.
Right. Now, you see in the first paragraph that it commences in precisely the same way as the original press release that was sent to you. There is a softening of the language from a reference to the thousands or hundreds of children who were trying to make something of a life that otherwise was deprived. That was in the first press release, but in this version, it now simply says the sisters did their best to care for the children who had nowhere else to go. Do you see that? Do you have any memory of the changes to that language?
Not specifically to this, but it is part of an ongoing development of our thinking. This is towards the end of 95, and so yes, over all that time there was development.
This reflects an improvement in your knowledge about the issues of responding to sexual abuse. Is that what you say?
That's a fair claim, yes.
Can I draw your attention to the second paragraph where there appears this sentence: "It is only natural that a legacy of parental deprivation would leave some former residents bitter and resentful." Do you see that? You accept from me that that is exactly the same sentence as appears in the original draft from 2 years before. You accept that? So your view on that issue appears not to have changed or improved, has it?
It's the same sentence. Again, we didn't use this press release either.
Yes, but it's your view at the time, isn't it?
Oh, yes.
Yes. You knew what was in this document. You are the contact person on this document. You are here saying, are you not, that there will be people out there with allegations to make about being abused as children, sexually and physically, who are bitter and resentful because of a legacy of parental deprivation.
Yes.
Now that, I suggest to you, is blaming the victim's parents and not yourselves.
I didn't read it that way.
Well, which way would you read it?
I would read it just as it says. Sometimes children who have experienced parental deprivation would have bitterness or resentfulness.
What is the relevance of that observation?
Not much, I think.
Then why is it there?
Because I hadn't taken it out.
Is there any particular reason why you hadn't taken it
No.
out? when these documents were being prepared, I take it that you were deliberate about your approach to the issues?
Would have been if we actually had got to the point of sending it out, yes.
But when you're just drafting, it's more in the nature of a brainstorm, is it? It's more casual than that.
We were working from time to time when we thought we might need something. We didn't use it.
You keep saying that. Do you think that that is a significant point? That
Well, actually, I do, yes.
Why
I
is
think
that?
it's significant because I do think that when you go to put something out, you are very careful about what you say.
Right. So on the 8th of September, when you were redrafting this statement, do you have a recollection of why you redrafted the statement at around this time?
I'm sorry, this is a lot of years ago.
Of course. Can I show you tab 56? Now, tab 56 is dated the 27th of September that year, so just a little while after what I've just shown you. And can you see from what's on the screen that it is substantially the same press release?
Yes.
Though there are, of course, some changes. And if we scroll down the screen, you'll see in the first paragraph there that there's a reference to several sisters regard their years at Neerkol as particularly happy ones, even though the work was hard and the circumstances demanding. You see that? And then you go on to being saddened by knowledge of the tragic life histories of some of the former children, and they rejoice in the achievements of many others. That's language that appears in the preceding draft from a few weeks before. You see that? Now, what was the function of including the observation that several sisters were regard their years at Neerkol as particularly happy?
It just reflected the reality.
It's just a truthful statement.
Yes.
It wasn't a proposition you were advancing to show that allegations of child abuse and wholesale neglect of children were less likely to be true because of that?
No, it wasn't. It was a balancing factor. That's still true today, that some of the sisters would regard some of their years at Neerkol as some of the best of their lives.
Do you?
I wasn't there.
You were there during holiday time, weren't you?
Oh, when there were only a few infants around the place, and yes, I quite enjoyed that.
You did? You see in the next paragraph, I'll withdraw that. This statement, which is drafted the 27th of September, obviously shows that for whatever reason there were efforts underway to prepare a press release. And this is still the same press release that was originally composed by Father Lucas. So this is what seems to be the third iteration of that document. You agree with that?
I think one builds out of the other. I think it's substantially changed by the time you get to this one.
Yes, well, it includes things in it that are substantially similar, though. In fact, exactly the same as Father Lucas's first statement, including the line in the second paragraph, "It is only natural that a legacy of parental deprivation would leave some former residents bitter and resentful."
Yes.
Across the space of several years, 3 years, and in September 95, across the space of that month, you were part of a process that involved the drafting of this document. You can accept that? Can you not accept that you would have been alive to the significance of a statement in which you accuse children of being bitter and resentful because of their parental legacy, their legacy of parental abandonment?
I wouldn't have named it as accusing children.
Or opining?
Yes.
Why would you, in the position that you were in at the time, take such a step?
Didn't in the end. We didn't use this one either.
You were taking the position in this document. Do you agree with that?
Yes.
And that, as such, this document reveals to the Commission your thinking at the time.
I think it also reveals that over time we were developing our thinking.
Well, your thinking didn't develop on that point from 1993 to 1995, did it, sister?
It would appear not.
Is there anything that you can offer to the Commission to explain why this is the view that you had at this point in time?
No, I don't have an explanation.
Looking back on it now with the benefit of hindsight, you obviously accept, do you, that it's incorrect as an opinion?
Could we say definitively, I wouldn't have put it in now, but can we say definitively that that would never happen?
You can say definitively that you wouldn't put it in now if you were drafting a press release,
Yes.
Is that right? Is that because you know now that it would not be well received?
I think it would offend some former residents.
Yes. So at the time that you wrote it, you didn't have that acuity of knowledge, did you?
It would appear not, no.
It was the case that at the time that you were responding to these issues, including in the formation of documents internally, that it was your view that it was appropriate to be defensive.
Now, wait a bit. I think we were part of a growing process. I don't think that was written there in order to be defensive. It was part of our understanding.
But you agree it hasn't grown or changed since '93, don't you?
Until then,
Yes.
I object to that.
Yes,
Your
yes.
Honour. It being that one
Well, I think
sentence
the-
or the entirety of the
And I think the question that Mr Kernaghan's getting at has in fact already been put and answered by Sister Loch.
Thank you, Alan. When you engaged in the investigation that preceded the first press release, and you were looking into the matters surrounding the allegations that you understood were in the book that was due to be published, did you make any notes of who you spoke to?
if I did, it would be among the documents, and I don't know whether there. I don't think there is. I can't recall it. Put it that way.
And you hadn't conducted an investigation like that before? Did you consult with anyone about how you should conduct that investigation? During the course of your discussions with various sisters, did you receive any information to suggest that anything untoward had occurred at Neerkol?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch.
Did you come across any information to suggest that anything untoward had occurred at Neerkol?
Yes, I did. There were certainly some people who thought that there had been children punished to a degree that went beyond what you could accept as strict.
What did you do about that information?
Well, all the people accused were already dead, so there was not much I could do about it at all.
So if an accused person is deceased, is it still your view that that's the end of the matter?
I think, as I had replied before, that in these days I would go back to the person bringing the allegation and talk to them about that, yes.
Did that information that you came across give you pause for thought about the need to make wider inquiries into Neerkol?
I don't believe it did. I'm not sure.
The sisters that you spoke to about their experiences at Neerkol, were those persons that you knew?
Oh, yes, yes.
Are they people you had worked with?
Not necessarily worked with them, but we are members of one congregation, so I definitely had contact with all of them, yes.
So you knew of them, but you wouldn't say you were necessarily friends?
Would depend on just how well I knew a particular person.
You heard evidence given by Bishop Heenan about why he absented himself from a meeting with an accused pederast. Did you hear that?
Yes.
And that he thought it might be more conducive to a discussion if it was with a fellow priest rather than with a bishop.
Yes.
Has that information given you any pause for thought about the likelihood of your role in investigating the matters that you investigated affecting the outcome of the evidence that you obtained?
I had not previously drawn that parallel, but I can see where you're going, yes.
You accept that there might be affecting the outcome of the evidence that you obtained?
I had not previously drawn that parallel, but
To the bottom of the information.
I think it unlikely, but I have to accept the possibility.
Why do you think it unlikely?
Simply because we have a very open and honest relationship among ourselves, and I don't think sisters would tell me anything other than the bare facts, but, well, I accept your proposition that it could have.
When you say they wouldn't tell you anything other than the bare facts...
Or the truth of the matter. They wouldn't conceal things from me in a deliberate way as far as I could see.
Might they reflect to you information they perceive you would prefer to hear?
I don't think so.
Your approach to them was on the basis of whether or not they could say if any of this was true?
I would have assumed that they shared my wish to get to the bottom of the matter.
And that assumption allowed you to communicate freely and openly with your sisters?
Yes. Mm.
I understand it in the very early 1990s, the sisterhood gave to Mr. Baker an award. Is that correct?
That information is contained in a letter, yes. That's all I know about it, I'm sorry.
You don't know, it's at tab 243. You don't know anything about that award?
I have not been able to find out anything about it.
Have you attempted to?
Yes.
And that was an award which he says in a letter at the bottom of page 2 of that document. This is a letter from Mr. Baker to Bishop Heenan. It was actually addressed to the Rockhampton congregation, but in any event, and to the Sisters of Mercy, but in any event, there's referenced at the bottom of page 2, in the last 3 lines, that he received an award for dedicated help in 1990. Is that correct?
I have seen that reference.
Yes, but you're unable to verify that is accurate?
That's true. I am unable to verify it.
Nonetheless, was it your understanding, at least by 1990, that Mr. Baker was a person of some renown to the sisters?
Oh, no, definitely not.
You didn't know him yourself?
I knew him,
Yes.
but oh, sorry, I beg your pardon. I thought you were saying that he was known as an offender or something like that. Sorry.
Just a well-known person?
Yes, he was, yes.
Highly respected?
Yes,
Regarded?
yes,
Well?
yes. Yes.
And you obviously thought that he might be a person who could provide an account of truth and be of assistance to any inquiry about what was going on at Neerkol.
Yes, I did.
And you said as much in 1994,
I did.
which, if we accept what Mr. Baker said, was about 4 years after your order had given him an award. And you said as much in 1994,
I did.
which, if we accept what Mr. Baker said, was about... These are the notes that you've been taken to that you sent or prepared for the bishop. And they're dated the 28th of October that year. At paragraph 9 on the second page, or rather point 9 on the second page, you refer to Mr. Baker and another man as being Rockhampton men who would have been boys at Neerkol, and that they would both have credible opinions. You see that? Now that's your expression of opinion. Why? Do you remember why you said that?
Be no reason why I would not say it. That was what I believed at that time.
Yes, what was the basis of that belief, sister?
Just knowing both of those men and having seen them around, having had a fair bit to do with them, just that.
You worked with them?
No, I hadn't. On a committee, yes.
What was the
On the
committee?
committee for the centenary celebrations at Neerkol.
Right.
They were both on that committee, I think.
And you thought of them as credible people?
Yes, I did.
And you indicate in that same paragraph that you could locate several further people,
Yes.
presumably for the same purpose, providing credible opinions as to what might or might not have happened. Is that right?
Yes.
So after writing that on the 28th of October 94, did you approach Mr. Baker?
No.
Did you seek out any such information?
No.
Why not?
I didn't feel the need to.
You'd identified him as a person who could provide information,
Yes.
but you chose not to seek that information?
I don't remember that I did.
So it's possible that you did.
I'm fairly sure I didn't, but certainly I don't remember doing it at all.
At the end of that memo, on the third page, you conclude by saying that you're not closed to hearing the real distress of anyone who has been offended against. And by that, you've had some versions put to you about what that means, but I take it that you mean that you're not closing the file in this matter.
Oh, definitely not.
Right. So as of the 28th of October 94, you were prepared to seek out further information and you'd identified pathways by which that might be done.
It wasn't a commitment to seeking out more information. It was a commitment to saying I could withhold judgment.
Why weren't you making such a commitment?
To
Seek out further information.
don't think I felt the need to. I didn't do it anyway, I don't think.
Sister, by this time, 94, you had been a professed member of your congregation for a substantial portion of time. That's right, isn't it? You would have considered yourself well-versed in the principles and fundamental philosophy of your congregation. The concept of seeking out truth would not have been alien to you.
I believe not.
The concept of protecting children was not something that was only just then becoming known to you.
It was a value of the congregation.
It's a fundamental value of
Yes,
the
it is.
congregation.
It is.
It is something that your founder based the congregation on. The instruction, teaching and protection of vulnerable children. Is it possible that the reason you didn't pursue information in the way that you'd identified as was possible because you didn't want to find out any more information?
I don't accept that proposition.
Then why did you not do it?
I don't think I did because I don't think I needed to anymore.
Wasn't this a situation of crisis? Had you identified this situation as a crisis for your congregation?
Certainly felt like one.
And in a crisis, your management response was to take it this far, but not further.
No, I didn't take it further, as I remember.
Is that because you felt that the information that you'd obtained up to that point was sufficient for present purposes?
I don't think I can answer that.
You can't recall what you were
No,
thinking at the
I
time?
can't recall.
Pardon me. You, by this point in time, that is 94 and October of 94, must have turned your mind to whether or not there was a position to be adopted about what had happened.
What had happened where?
Well, you must have thought or had to turn your mind to what the position of your congregation was about whether or not child abuse had occurred at Neerkol.
You are talking about quite a lengthy period. This extends from when I was born, up until 1978.
Let me ask it to you a different way. Did you feel in 94 a responsibility as the leader of your congregation to make a determination about just what had happened at Neerkol?
I'm not sure that I saw it as my responsibility to do all of the determination, but certainly to be open to such matters being determined, certainly.
You were prepared to let other people make that decision?
Yes.
Such as?
In one instance at least, there was, I believe, police inquiries, whatever else was happening.
So you were prepared to defer to the judgment of police and the criminal justice system?
Well, definitely.
And did you assist that by bundling up every document you could lay your hands on and giving it to the police?
Not every document I could lay my hands on. There were, by the time of this commission, several thousand. I certainly responded to every request we had and certainly provided full information whenever we were asked for. Same.
When you were asked for, is that what you said? Yes. That's the qualification you put on that. Can I show you tab 84? This is something you've been asked a question about. This is the file note about Sister Cordelia. You remember being shown
Yes,
that
yes,
before
we
lunch?
looked at it earlier.
And it incorporates your recollection as of the 13th of November 96 that you hadn't passed this information on to the police. And this is information about Kevin Baker allegedly doing things he should not to a boy at Neerkol. This is a demonstration, isn't it, Sister, that you were only prepared to provide information to police if you were asked for it?
I think we explored previously that I agree that it would have been wiser to have provided this, and I'll certainly admit to that.
I'm not asking you that, but thank you. It's the case, isn't it, that at 1996, in November, you were only prepared to provide information to the police if you were asked for it?
I think that's generally true, yes.
You weren't proactive?
I didn't go to the police myself with that, no.
And you didn't do that because you didn't believe the information would likely assist them in their inquiries?
That was right.
How were you in a position to suppose that you could make such a judgment?
As I agreed earlier, I wasn't.
But you nonetheless made the judgment.
I did.
Did you think, in that circumstance, that given what the investigation was about, it didn't touch upon the information you'd received?
What I agreed to was that it would have been wiser for me to provide that.
See, you didn't know what the investigation was about, did you?
No.
So how could you know if this information from Sister Cordelia was relevant to it?
I've agreed that I didn't.
You didn't know. So where you say that I do not believe the above is likely to be relevant, that's not right?
It's a reference to the fact that I didn't believe Sister Cordelia could provide any facts or dates or names that was actually going to be helpful.
She could, however, tell the police, like she told you, that at least on one occasion someone had made a complaint about the man who was under investigation.
Yes, I agree with that.
Is it the case, Sister, that the reason you didn't pass this information on to the police is because you didn't want them to know about it?
No, I don't agree with that.
Were you trying to protect Sister Cordelia's dignity?
No, not her. She wouldn't have been particularly bothered, I don't think. It's just that I don't think she would have been very helpful.
It's not the case that you were trying to conceal this?
No.
But in any event, that's the effect.
Yes.
It was concealed.
Mm-hmm.
When you received that information, did it give you pause for thought about the need to further your own inquiries?
No.
Did you seek out yourself information about Mr. Baker?
This was in the hands of the police, this investigation.
That doesn't.
We were always very careful not to interfere.
I'm not suggesting that you should interfere with a police inquiry. You should provide them with all information relevant, shouldn't you?
Yes.
And you knew that then, didn't you?
Yes.
I'm suggesting to your sister that this information would have suggested to you that there had been a problem involving yet another person at Neerkol.
I'm sorry, yet another?
Well, someone other than Father Durham.
Oh, okay. Well, I already knew that, yes.
You already knew it. Did this further give you motivation to inquire about Mr. Baker?
Well, no, it didn't.
You could have found out further information from other sisters, from other records, from
I
other
don't think
students.
so, no.
You couldn't have done any of those things?
I don't think I would have instigated any parallel investigation running alongside a police investigation, no.
Did you ring the police officers and say, look, we obviously have a significant interest in this. We'd appreciate any information you have that would be of assistance to us?
No, I wouldn't have dreamt of it, no.
Right. Because that's not the relationship that you would have with police. Did you ring them and say, we understand this is happening, you're doing this investigation, let us know if we can be of assistance?
Oh, they would have known that they could get whatever information they wanted from us, certainly.
How would they have known that?
Oh, we knew the police fairly well. You know, we wouldn't have... they never did hesitate to come to us when they wanted any information.
So you're saying you had a dialogue with police at this time?
We were beginning to.
And you couldn't have said to them, look, we know you're investigating Mr. Baker. We'd benefit from the assistance of your inquiries?
Ms. Neerkol.
Your Honour, the witness has answered the question about whether she went to the police on a number of occasions, and that was also dealt with by the senior counsel assisting. The practice guidelines do permit this commission to restrict cross-examination where it becomes overtly repetitive, and I would submit that this is an appropriate occasion to do so.
Your Honour, with great respect, the sister doesn't answer the question. The sister is avoiding answering the question.
Which question, Mr. Kernaghan?
About the nature of her relationship with the police and whether or not she was in an institutional position to have a dialogue with the police about inquiries into a former staff member of Neerkol.
I think Sister Loch has answered that question.
Well, the answer to the question is not the answer to the question is not responding to the test that's taken to that answer. It's one thing to just simply answer the question. It's another thing to be able to withdraw that. The answer to the question is not responding to the test that's...
Sister Loch has been clear that she didn't give that information to the police and has answered questions with respect to why.
Please, Your Honour. When you, sister, I'm moving to another topic now, just so that you're aware of where we're up to. When you gave evidence to counsel assisting, you indicated in the transcript reference, Your Honour, in Commissioners is 7820 at line 37, that you were in a process of understanding the issue and developing procedures. Do you remember giving that evidence?
I do.
Yeah. I just want to ask you about the aspect by which you say that you were in the process of understanding the issue. That's something that you've repeatedly said in your evidence. And the issue, I take it, is the issue of child sexual abuse.
Sexual abuse and physical abuse and the long-term impact of them.
And is it more the long-term impact that you were having difficulties understanding?
No, it was the entire issue, including how it arose, where it arose, the fact that why it might be a long time before somebody revealed it. It was the full scope of the abuse issue that we needed to learn about and were gradually learning about.
Certainly wasn't the seriousness of the abuse. You always understood that.
No, I think even the seriousness of the abuse was a deepening realisation, because that's very linked to the long-term impact.
Or was it the credibility of the seriousness of the abuse that was developing over time?
And the credibility of those reporting the abuse.
Yes, I'll rephrase that, Your Honour.
I'll just get Mr Kernaghan to put that question again.
Is it the case that rather than understanding the seriousness of the abuse over time, you were coming to believe it more?
Not rather than, no. We did need to understand the actual issue.
Have the sisters ever conducted their own internal review of allegations concerning Mr Baker?
No.
Is there a reason for that?
I've always believed it was covered by the police investigation. I don't think it needed us to add anything to it.
You're content to rely on the process of the courts?
Yes.
Do you consider that you were in a position to conduct your own independent investigation?
Not really, no.
Does Mr Baker have an ongoing dialogue with you
No,
or your institution that you're aware of?
no.
Have you sought out those persons who claim to be Mr Baker's victims for discussion?
I've talked with several of them, yes.
Have you talked with all of them?
I'm sorry, I couldn't attest to that without being very careful to go back through the books.
All right.
I don't think I personally would have talked with all of them. Somebody probably has.
In any event, you're prepared to do that? In any event, you're prepared to do that?
I guess so, yes, if they wanted to.
And if they did want to, and you did speak with them, what redress could you, or do you think you would be able to provide them if you'd never conducted your own investigation into the matter?
Where we are now, we don't always, depending on what the allegation is, we don't always ask people for proof. It depends on just where we're at. So I wouldn't necessarily start an investigation.
Do you equate the term investigation with the term proof?
No, in the sense that I think it's more about probability.
Investigation is more about probability.
As I said, we don't usually subject we don't subject every person who comes forward with an allegation to a full investigation. Right back at the beginning we were, because we just didn't know where we were. But if somebody comes forward now with an allegation against somebody that we've already accepted as an offender, we are unlikely to put them through a whole series of forensic type of proof.
Do you accept Mr Baker as an offender?
It would appear so.
And in that
We
case,
have, again, the probability. It hasn't been proven in a court.
but that's based on what?
The allegations.
Prepared to take the allegation at its face?
There are several.
Yes. And you're prepared to take them at their face?
By now we are. I don't know that we were right at the beginning.
And with all that you've learned in recent times about the needs of victims of historical sexual abuse, do you have an understanding of the value of vindicating what they say?
Yes, I believe so.
And the importance of having their history borne witness to?
Yes.
And that one of the ways in which that can be done is by demonstrating overtly to them that you've gone through everything you can to assess what occurred.
I think I'm out of my depth here. I don't. Am I being...
Do you not understand the question, sister?
I don't think I do.
Sister, as the leader of your organisation, you understand that it falls ultimately to you to determine how best to look after people who are the victims of child sexual assault as a result of members of your order. You have to consider ways in which that outcome can be best achieved.
Yes.
You've given evidence of a number of things that you would do differently
Yes.
now than you did previously. You accept that?
Yes.
And you've given evidence of a growing understanding of the issues involved.
Yes.
And the issues include not just the seriousness of the allegations, but the effect of the abuse upon people over time.
Yes.
Have you reached an understanding of what victims of child sexual abuse need in terms of bearing witness to what happened to them?
When you say bearing witness, could you explain a little more what you mean?
Learning about what happened to them and helping them to learn more about what happened to them.
Such as through counselling, perhaps?
I think that's the difficulty with the proposition. It's too general, Mr.
I'll
Kagan.
approach it in a different
Yes.
way, Your Honour. Do you see any value in assisting victims of child sexual abuse to track down records about their attendance?
Oh, definitely, yes.
Do you see
Definitely.
value in sitting down with them and taking as much information as you can from them
Yes,
and going out to other people who would have information,
if that's what they want to have happen, yes.
whether or not they wanted it to happen?
We usually work quite a bit with what they would like to have happen these days.
So how do you protect your own institution's long-term interest to seek out as much information as possible about child abuse that occurs within it?
We're talking historical. If anything were to happen in the current era, it would have to be referred to the police. There's just no option.
If a victim said, these things happened to me, but I don't want to take it any further than that, don't you have an independent duty to inquire?
Yes, but we would also have the duty to refer it to the police. And it would be in that context that we would be making whatever investigations were needed.
Are you
As
prepared
well as-
today, knowing all that you know, to commence an inquiry into the allegations about Mr Baker?
If anyone wished me to do so, we would. This has been, individual complaints have certainly been investigated to the degree that we're able to. We don't refuse to at all.
Finally, just to be clear that I've put something to you that I have instructions to put to you, sister. It's not the case, is it, that throughout the course of your time dealing with sexual allegations involving Mr Baker, that you simply did nothing?
Your Honour, there's a bit of a double negative in there. Perhaps that could be put a little more clear.
Just that, Your Honour. During the course of your dealing with allegations about Mr Baker, I suggest to you that you did nothing.
I believe we did everything that we were asked to do, and we've not refused to look for any information ever.
I suggest to you that at no time have you sought to disabuse Mr Baker of the notion that he is the recipient of an award from the Sisters of Mercy.
I didn't actually avert to that at all until I saw the documents for this Royal Commission, so no, I haven't addressed that in any way, shape or form. I don't know that it is not true any more than I know that it is true.
If it were true, would you retract the award?
I'm not in a... I don't know.
It's something that you would consider in the fullness of time.
You think it's important? Oh, sorry, I'm not supposed to ask you questions.
Do you?
I don't think I've given it any consideration at all. Sorry. It is 1990.
So what?
Well, that's not helpful, Mr. Kernaghan.
Do you think something turns on its age?
I will promise to give it some consideration.
Do you think something turns on its age?
Depends what it is, rather, I think.
Sister, you've conceded that you've made a number of, or you've taken a number of actions over the course of the time that you've dealt with these issues that you would not do now.
Yes, I agree that we have learnt a lot.
Do you, in that concession, accept that some of those actions were errors on your part?
Yes, I do. I'm sorry about that, but I do.
Do you believe, as the head of your order, that you're the person best placed to lead the order?
No, I don't think I would ever claim that.
Is it an honour or a position that you can turn down?
It's a position to which you are elected.
Can you decline the election?
Yes, you can.
Has this Royal Commission process and the evidence you've heard given you pause for thought about whether or not you should step down?
Your Honour, I object. This line of questioning can't assist the Commission at all in my submission in the scope of the inquiry before it. It appears to be merely personal nitpicking, with the greatest of respect to my friend.
Whether or not this leader of the organisation considers herself in an appropriate position to continue to lead the organisation is relevant to the Royal Commission's understanding of its contemporary response, in my respectful submission.
I think, given where the questioning has gone, Mr. Kernaghan, with respect to Sister Loch's responses, I draw to your attention the way in which Sister Loch has drawn a distinction between her initial responses and her contemporary responses.
Very well, Your Honour, I'll move on.
So I'm not sure what the basis of the proposition is.
Well, her own qualification to lead.
As at 2015.
Yes.
So I ask the question again of you. I'm not sure what the... As at 2015.
Yes.
I can't see how we're going to be assisted by that, Mr. Kernaghan.
I'll move on, Your Honour. You spoke of Dr. Grant, Sister, and his assistance in formulating a number of improved lessons for you, or greater knowledge, I think.
It was both knowledge and procedures that he helped us with, yes.
And obviously you continue to take advice from a number of sources about
Yes.
how best to proceed.
Yes.
And the policy and procedure that I took you to at the start of my cross-examination is an example of continued improvement and development. Do you continue to have interaction with Dr. Grant?
No.
Did Dr. Grant assist you just that one occasion?
No. He came again to Rockhampton at our invitation in February of 1997, at which time he did training sessions as well as information sessions and help with procedures, etc.
As part of your response to, or your systematic response to dealing with the issue of child sexual abuse, you have regard to systems like Towards Healing. You've given evidence of that. Do you also maintain a close regard to research and comment that criticises it?
I don't personally, but yes, as part of the church, yes. Mm-hmm.
Do you yourself, as the leader of your organisation, appraise yourself of alternative views towards towards healing?
Well, we have a commitment towards healing as part of the church, so therefore we work with whatever changes are or are not made within that process.
What I'm asking you is if you found that towards healing wasn't working or could be criticised by legitimate commentators with legitimate criticisms, is there a way that you can incorporate that in?
Yes, as part of our associations and conferences, yes.
Were you aware that Dr. Grant criticised towards healing?
Yes, I have heard that. I didn't actually hear the program, but I have heard that.
On Late Line in 2013.
I'll accept that that's what it was, yes.
Did you have any cause to consider what he had to say?
I only heard about it this year.
Did you inquire about it?
Just in general terms, yes.
And was there any discussion within your institution about the criticisms that Dr. Grant had raised?
No.
This was one of the first people that you brought in as an expert to guide your response.
As I said, I only heard
About the criticisms that Dr. Grant had raised.
no.
This was one of the first people that you brought in.
Yes.
2015?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Yes, thank you, Your Honour, Commissioners.
No questions.
No. Bosley.
Sister Loch, my name's Claire Bosley. I'm the lawyer representing David Owen.
Yes, thank you.
Can you hear me properly?
Yes, I can now.
I have a few questions to ask you in relation to some evidence you've given already regarding the way you dealt with Mr. Owen in the mid to late 1990s. You've given evidence of meeting with Mr. Owen on the 7th of March 1997 with Mylene Carrick in Brisbane. Was that the first time you'd met with a Neerkol survivor to discuss their allegations?
I think that would depend on how you're using the word. As was shown earlier, I had been to visit a woman earlier back in 1994.
Was it the first time you'd met with a Neerkol survivor who alleged sexual abuse while at Neerkol?
Yes, I think it was.
Now, you gave some evidence in relation to questions from senior counsel assisting regarding your change in attitude to the veracity of Mr. Owen's allegations. And you indicated that the turning point was a conversation that you had with Bishop Heenan in relation to his acceptance of allegations of sexual abuse by a different parish priest who operated in Neerkol.
Yes.
And I think you accepted that that happened sometime in early 1996,
Yes.
following the finalisation of some unsuccessful legal proceedings.
I'd say at least within the first half of 96. I'm just uncertain about those dates and I couldn't track it.
Perhaps if paragraph 60 of your first statement can be placed on the screen. And Sister Loch, if you accept that prior to that paragraph, you indicate that AYQ's application was finalised and unsuccessful in January 1996. So it was sometime close to the finalisation of AYQ's legal proceedings.
I just say not long after, so I couldn't track it more than that. I'm sorry.
It was certainly before the ministerial statement was made in September 1996. But you say that this conversation was the turning point in terms of you accepting the veracity of David Owen's allegations of sexual abuse and physical abuse.
Certainly opened my mind to the possibility, yes.
And I think you said earlier, in addition to that conversation, the training you received from Dr. Grant contributed to you opening your mind to the veracity of Mr. Owen's statement.
That certainly helped.
And your first engagement with Dr. Grant was also before September 1996. In fact, that occurred when you attended a meeting in June 1996, and that's at paragraph 61 of your statement. I won't take you in detail to the evidence you've given in respect of your response to the ministerial statement of September 96, but it's fair to say that you made reference to other complaints of which you were aware in respect of abuse at Neerkol in your response.
Yes.
And I wonder if tab 68 could be placed on the screen. Sister Loch, this is a copy of an article that appeared in the Courier Mail in which you're quoted. So this is where your response to the media in respect of the Minister's statements is recorded. And I wonder if you can scroll down to the middle of the second column. And Sister, you see that in the middle of the second column, there's some discussion about what you have said to the journalist in respect of the Minister's statement, and you're quoted in that report. And perhaps if you can scroll up to the top of the third column. Where it indicates there are certainly a handful of, in brackets, past complaints, but they have not necessarily been substantiated. Does that accord with your recollection of what you told the journalist who wrote this report?
Yes.
And it accords with your summary of your response in respect of the Minister's statement. Now, in your... And at this time, you turned around from doubting the veracity of Mr Owen's claim to accepting the likelihood that what he said occurred had in fact occurred due to your conversation with Bishop Heenan.
Yes. At least I was open to the possibility.
And similarly, you were open to the possibility that Reg Durham had also sexually offended against residents at Neerkol based on the opinion expressed by Bishop Heenan. You didn't express those thoughts in your response to the ministerial statement, though, did you?
No, I don't think I have.
Take your time to read it. I can assure you that on my reading it doesn't reflect any suggestion that you accept the past complaints to which you refer. You simply say they've been unsubstantiated.
Yes.
Now, moving forward to the meeting with Mr Owen in March 1997, you provided a supplementary statement where you refer to evidence that Mr Owen gave that I can see someone clear in respect of denials of allegations by you. It's not suggested that you ever directly denied Mr Owen's allegations over a telephone call prior to this meeting face-to-face. Do you understand that?
Yes.
However, it is suggested that you certainly never indicated that you accepted his allegations prior to that face-to-face meeting.
That would be accurate.
And in fact, even though upon meeting with Mr Owen and hearing his stories of physical and sexual abuse, you didn't indicate to him face-to-face when you met him that you accepted the veracity of his statement, did you?
That's true, but I was very inclined to believe him, and I'm sure I conveyed that to him.
I wonder if... sorry, excuse me.
In my manner, I'm sure I conveyed that to him.
I wonder if the tab 99 can be placed on the screen. Sister Loch, this is your file note of the meeting with Mr Owen.
Thank you.
On the 7th of March 1997. and I'll give you an opportunity to read that before I take you to the relevant section about which I seek to ask some further questions. Perhaps if it can be scrolled to the second page. Now, Sister Loch, in the second paragraph of the second page, you indicate that Mylene, from her role as counsellor, expressed complete acceptance of all David said. You then say, I did not do this as I felt it would be improper of me to do so, since the process must take its course for the sake of all concerned. I do, however, consider that his complaint warrants very serious consideration by our CPSE. Can you explain to the Commission what you mean when you say, I did not do this as I felt it would be improper of me to do so, since the process must take its course for the sake of all concerned?
I think it is my reference to the fact that we had put by then, we had at least a draft type of process in place which involved some level of investigation or however we were going to do it, and that I didn't want to jump the gun on that.
So you felt restricted by that process from acknowledging Mr Owen's allegations as true, which is what you accepted at that point.
Yes.
And you understand that by Mr Owen's allegations as true, which is what you accepted at that point, that it continued the trauma that has been associated with his but not personally accepting what he was saying was true, that it continued.
I think I would need to go, if that's what David says, yes, I'll accept that that's what he's saying. I also felt, though, that the meeting did go a long way towards making it possible for us to speak, which was good.
Certainly it was a step in the right direction because you actually met him face to face for the first time. But you understand now, based on the training that you've received, that acknowledging the allegations is a significant part of the process of healing that's involved in these issues.
Yes.
And that wasn't something that you engaged in at this point.
Time. No, that's true.
You have subsequently engaged in that process, and indeed you've told the Commission today that you accept Mr Owen's account of what occurred to him at Neerkol.
Yes,
but you didn't at this point.
That's true.
I have no further questions.
Mr Plunk.
Sister, I appear for AYO and AYK. Do you see those on the list? And Miss Diane Carpenter. Right. You set out in your statement that the Sisters of Mercy first came to Rockhampton in 1873 Right, we know that Neerkol was set up in 1885 and continued for about 84 years until the decision was made in 1975 to close. And by 1978, you weren't taking any more children into the orphanage. And by 1979, Neerkol was closed down.
Yes.
Right, now, you set out in your paragraph 4 membership of the Sisters of Mercy from 1950 to 2010. And I know you've had access to archivist material for your congregation, because in paragraph 137 you made reference to reliance upon that to make assessment of those who made application for the government redress scheme. Were you able to prepare any list of those nuns which worked exclusively at Neerkol during the relevant period of time?
I don't believe there is a list of people who worked exclusively at Neerkol.
So to understand from what you're saying that some nuns may have moved from one of the institutions that the congregation managed to another, perhaps?
Yes, certainly.
Right, but nevertheless, at Neerkol, was there more or less a permanent cadre, if I can use that expression, of nuns who were there more consistently than others?
I've never really tried to evaluate that, but certainly not in recent years. But yes, there would be some who spent more time there than others. There would be some who perhaps only had 1 year there. There'd be others who spent a lot of time there.
Did the orphanage produce annual reports?
Oh, no.
Has there been any history written about the orphanage from within your organisation?
Not a history as such. What I can, there's some sort of a kind of an internal scrapbook sort of thing that puts a bit together. It's not a history. It's certainly not a professional history. I suppose you could say it's kind of a collection of bits and pieces, I suppose, yes.
Right, and is that publicly available in any form?
No, it was not published.
All right. No, as I understand it, your order was formed in Ireland in 1831.
Yes.
And you established various centres in Ireland, and then England.
Yes.
And then the order, as it were, went around the world to include
Several
many
parts of the world, several countries.
including Australia. Mm-hmm. So that during the early years, is it fair to say that the nuns who came to Australia were from Ireland?
Rockhampton. There were certainly several Irish members of the congregation, but at no time, even the first group to come from Brisbane were not all Irish.
So that when we look at the complement of nuns working in the orphanage, say particularly in the last 20 or 30 years, would they be mainly Australian nuns? When I say that, Australian citizens of Australia who...
I'd be almost certain that they'd have to be.
All right. You had some contact with the nuns in your period of training in the 1950s as a student? When you went to school?
Oh, when I went to school, yes,
Yeah.
certainly.
Were there Irish nuns then?
Yes. My first principal was Irish.
Right.
And there were occasionally Irish sisters.
There were Irish nuns then?
Yes. My first principal was Irish.
Most of the time which Neerkol operated, the Sisters of Mercy had no formal policies relating to the recruitment of staff at Neerkol. Most staff were sisters.
Yes.
Were there any policies about what qualifications and training the sisters would need as a minimum to work at the orphanage?
No, there were not.
So the training they'd have would be as within the convent itself.
Except in the case of people who were trained teachers, their training would have been according to whatever was the standard training at the time.
Can you give us any idea of those who had training as teachers? And we know there's a registered nurse as well, compared to those who did not have any formal training.
No, I'm
as teachers.
sorry, I could go looking for that, but I don't know it offhand.
Right. The Executive Director of Child Safety, Magella Ryan, gave evidence yesterday, and you were here for that. And she referred in her paragraphs 55 to paragraph 60 of the findings of the Ford inquiry in relation to the staff, that's the nuns at the orphanage. Do you recall that evidence? Have you read Magella?
Yes, I have.
All right, and the Ford inquiry found that the orphanage was understaffed. Do you recall that evidence? Have you read Magella?
Yes, I have.
All right, and we're heavily dependent upon children from early age to do a lot of the work around the orphanage. I take it you'd agree with those.
But there isn't to question the Ford inquiry.
And that the ratio of staff and children was grossly inadequate.
I would agree.
All right. Now, with this, was grossly inadequate.
I would agree.
All right. Now, were these matters internally within the order from the review? Are you able to say of the archived records that were the subject of discussion by the nuns at the relevant period of time?
I'm sorry, I think I've got mixed up with the Ford inquiry.
What I'm saying is the Ford inquiry.
I think it was your reference to the review,
Yes.
Mr. Plunkett. I think you said
The
were
Ford
these
inquiry
matters-
made,
Yeah.
which Ford had found. Now, Ms. Ford also said that the nuns were expected to take in every child regardless of whether they had the resources to deal with it. And she also said that the nuns individually had no choice but to do as directed because of the vow of obedience. Would you agree with those findings by Elaine Ford?
Well, certainly we did have to take, or at least I think would be more accurate to say there was a lot of pressure to take every child that didn't have a place to go otherwise. That would be true. As far as the sisters are concerned, we do take a voluntary vow of obedience. So, yes, we follow the directions of our major superiors.
Because what I'm going to suggest is that many of the nuns who were given the responsibility of looking after the children were not properly trained to do so.
Oh, I'd have to accept that, yes.
And did not have the personal capacities to discharge their obligations as carers of children.
I think it points out elsewhere in the Ford inquiry that there really were not the facilities for training people in childcare for much of the period in which Neerkol operated.
Was there any internal systems of review within the order identifying these deficiencies at any stages up until the closure?
Yes, I think it is somewhere in my statement, and I think it might be towards the 1974 or something like that. We made a decision that we would wind Neerkol down, and that we changed. About that time we changed the system in which they were, the children were cared for, to group home type of concept, and then we took them to group homes within Rockhampton rather than at Neerkol. So there was an evolution during that period.
You were there as a junior professor sister
Yes.
after 1964 during the summer period. How many years were you there from 1964 during the summer period?
2 years, I think, for about 2 weeks at a time.
Did you ever witness the disciplining of children by the nuns during that period of time?
During those times, only the babies were there. Most of the children were out in holiday homes. So basically we were helping with the care of whatever children were in the infants set up at that time, the nursery.
There were, of course, children who didn't go to homes during the summer period, older children, older than the infants. Is that not the case?
In the times I was there, I don't remember any of them being around.
You said in paragraph 31 that you yourself had been a boarder and a student with the Sisters of Mercy for 3 years,
Yes.
and you were aware that strict discipline and corporal punishment had been used not just at Neerkol but fairly widely. In your paragraph 31, do you see that?
Yes, the two sentences don't connect quite the way you just said them. I had been at the Range College, and while I was aware, it was still a shock to learn that it had gone through a stage of abuse.
Were you ever involved in the disciplining of children at Neerkol?
No, I have never disciplined a child anywhere with a cane or anything like that. Yes, I've certainly been involved in discipline as a principal.
Right. Did you witness any discipline and or corporal punishment at Neerkol?
No, never.
Now, you've told the Commission that you had no real awareness about the sexual abuse of children until the training you did in November of 1996.
I said I had an inadequate understanding,
All right.
and that's true.
Inadequate understanding. And that, the measure of that, the level of inadequacy is as a result of what you'd learnt in November of 1996.
That certainly helped, but it's been an ongoing journey. I don't consider myself an expert now.
All right. Now, you say in paragraph 76 of your statement, referring to the session with Dr. Grant in November of 1996, that the impact of the training of the sisters was very positive, even if confronting. I was approached by several sisters after the training to speak with me about their experiences working at Neerkol.
Yes.
Could you just expand upon that last sentence in paragraph 74?
In general terms, I can. I think it helped quite a lot of the sisters to reflect on what their experiences had been, whether they were teachers, people who minded children, or perhaps did both. And for some of them, it was an extremely traumatic part of their life because that they themselves were working so very hard and in difficult circumstances. Others expressed just what a happy time it had been for them. So it was a whole mix. But it helped them to reflect about it, I think.
And
It's good.
how many sisters were involved in this discussion?
Oh, it wasn't a discussion. This is some individuals. I don't think I can. It's certainly several, but I can't tell you whether it was 10 or 20 or what it was. I'm sorry.
And you say that they approached you after the training, so I take it for a period of time.
Yes.
After November of 1996. Did any of these sisters report any physical, emotional or sexual abuse of children as having been witnessed by them?
Certainly not sexual. Some of them said that, yes, they felt that excessive corporal punishment had been used at times. A couple of them did that.
Did they give any
particularly
examples?
the earlier lives. Not of children, no, but just of their own experience.
What, nuns disciplining other nuns?
Oh, no, no.
I don't understand your last answer.
Of a child being hit more severely than they were happy with.
Was any of that sufficient to warrant triggering an investigation by you into the incident reported?
It wasn't of that nature, and we're talking about 1996, and by then the place has been closed for nearly 20 years.
All right. Now, given the accounts that have been given involving allegations of sexual abuse against Father Anderson and Father Durham taking place in the presbytery,
Yes.
do you find it rather surprising that it never occurred to any of the sisters at the time that something untoward was going on?
Yes, I do find it surprising, but I've seen exactly the same thing happen in families, so...
Was there any, I know we're talking about a large span of time, but at any stage, to your knowledge, was there any internal arrangement among the nuns to report untoward incidents which they may become aware of at the orphanage?
Sorry, I just don't know.
All right. Well, I imagine that as a matter of common sense, that if something happened that was of concern for an individual nun, the usual procedure would be to report up the hierarchy.
They would report that to a superior, who might then in turn talk, or they could have gone directly to a major superior.
Did the archivists find any such records?
No.
Were they searched for?
Oh, yes, yes.
They would have necessarily...
Well, we don't actually hold extensive records. We hold things like registers and school registers, lists of people who work there, that sort of thing, sisters who work there.
Right,
We don't hold files on individual children or anything of that nature. I think there are 2 or 3 where they come about where a person has been to the State Department to try to get their files, and if they gave them to us for safekeeping, we'd have kept them. So,
AYK in her evidence at paragraph 24 talks about receiving a birthday. Says she received a necklace, and her evidence is that she showed that necklace to a young nun shortly after she had received the gift from Father Durham. And the nun became very upset and told her that she was never allowed to be near Father Durham again unaccompanied. Do you recall that evidence?
I only read that allegation at the time when it
Well,
came in.
if
I
you
don't know
assume-
whether it's evidence or not.
If you assume that that is truthful, then it would seem to suggest that that young nun harboured suspicions about Father Durham.
It does suggest that. But I can't tell you because I don't know who's involved.
Precisely, but from your experience as a nun, would there be any inhibition on a younger or junior nun from reporting such an event to a superior nun?
Quite the opposite. The expectation would be that she would report that. If that was a serious concern, that she would report it.
You spoke of your own lack of knowledge about child sexual abuse up until November of 1996.
Mm-hmm.
Is it to be assumed that because of the poor quality of recruitment or training of nuns at the orphanage, that they were simply naive about the possibility that sexual offences were being committed on the children by Father Anderson and Father Durham in the presbytery?
Unfortunately, I believe that could be true.
All right. And is that naivety perhaps a result of applicants for sisterhood coming into the convent at a very early age? As I understand it, perhaps I'll expand on this, the recruitment of prospective nuns would often take place from the schools at a young age, early teenagehood. Could you perhaps give us some insight?
Some people entered soon after school, others did not.
so that their experience of life would not have been as robust as someone going out into the general community.
That would certainly vary from person to person.
Now, if we could just move to another topic, that is the question of the importance of the apology to the victims. In your second statement, you make reference to the exchange between AYO and AYK and the congregation in seeking a fulsome apology. Do you recall those passages?
I do, yes.
The complaint of AYO and AYK being that the apologies offered by the congregation were of a generic and general nature,
Yes.
and the complaints they asked for, in their view, should be designed to be specific as to them and as to the abuse that they suffered.
Quite certainly, our professional standards officer expressed directly to them that they could bring that forward, but we didn't. That was a very brief contact, and we haven't had their stories to be able to base a specific apology on. You need to, like, if you're going to be more specific, you need to know what it is that they are saying, and we didn't have those stories until just these last few weeks.
Right.
Or last week, and I mean, they weren't public either. I've had the stories, but I haven't been able to share them with anyone to suggest that we should do anything with it.
From what you know about the adverse impact, personal impact on the victims of child abuse, do you understand why a victim may be reluctant to approach the institution whose members have perpetrated or allowed the perpetration of abuse to occur?
Yes, and I think in the case of the persons you're talking about, any contact we've had with them has come through another agency, am I right?
I can't answer that.
I think it came through Lotus Place. Is that not in one of the statements?
Certainly they were not part of the Neerkol action.
Oh, no, I think their years are much later.
Yes,
am I right?
in the late 70s.
Yes.
They were there almost to the end of the closing.
Yes.
Now, all I was going to say was you understand why they'd be reluctant. In the formulation of a policy, the victim is going to be hesitant and even painfully trying to elicit from the organisation accepting responsibility the precise terms of the apology.
It is one of the reasons why our professional standards officer does attempt to work quite closely with any other agency that receives complaints.
Well, as far as AYO and AYK are concerned, now that you have the particulars in the statements and their evidence given to this Royal Commission, can you see your way through to helping with your professional standards unit the design and the settlement of an apology personal to them and referable to the
Yes,
abuse?
yes.
You've given evidence about the litigation that took place and the settlements that followed for some of the survivors of Neerkol. Now, that litigation was taken by a set group of people, and not everyone, obviously, who's given evidence in the course of these proceedings. You're nodding, you're indicating yes?
I'm following what you're saying.
Okay, good,
Yes.
thank you. AYO and AYK were not plaintiffs in any legal action seeking to recover damages for the suffering, the pain and suffering that occurred to them at Neerkol. Do you understand that?
Yes.
Now, you've given evidence in your second statement as to financial assistance that has been given to AYK in relation to surgery.
Yes.
Have you given any consideration to the Institute, as you're now called, setting up a redress fund for those who did not receive any compensation pursuant to the settlement arising from the instituted legal proceedings?
We haven't at this stage. We
Would you-
rather support the Royal Commission's current consideration of a national redress scheme, which we would become part of. But that is not yet.
Right. Can you appreciate, in terms of healing and justice, that if two of my clients, not knowing there was legal proceedings, were not the beneficiaries of any settlement, that it would be unjust if they were not given an equal opportunity to receive compensation in like terms?
We'll certainly consider any approach that comes to us.
Can I turn now to the Exhibit 26.26? That is the Institute policy and practice in relation to children and vulnerable adults. Do I understand this policy is for current complaints, or does it extend back to historic complaints?
The flowchart, it does distinguish between historic complaints and current complaints.
So this policy would relate to
Yes.
claimants from the Neerkol orphanage days.
It's meant to cover any complaint that might come to us, whether it does that adequately or not.
And it's clear, is it not, that the Institute takes responsibility for the congregations as they may have been formally constituted? Right. Can you just help me understand the rationale for the formation of the Institute and why it was necessary for the order to reconstitute itself as the Institute?
I don't know that it was necessary. It was a decision that we chose to make.
And are the assets...
It's a very complicated sort of a process. I don't really think I could even attempt to cover it.
All right. In the interest of expedition, can I just simply ask you this, that the assets of the congregation, were they individually owned by each congregation?
Originally, yes,
And now are those assets transferred to the Institute?
they are.
And the Institute accepts responsibilities for any wrongdoing that may have taken place within the context of a particular... On page 2 of the policy and practice, under the heading current complaint response processes towards healing, it is recorded that where allegations are of a criminal nature, all complainants are strongly encouraged to inform the police. And again, under the heading current complaint response process, direct complaints to the Institute, it says where allegations are of a criminal nature, all complainants are strongly encouraged to inform the police. All right?
That's right.
You're aware, are you not, that at least in Queensland and in other states, there is a mandatory reporting requirement where a teacher or a registered nurse or anyone else who exercises the status of guardian over children to report to the Chief Executive Officer of Child Safety any reasonable suspicion of abuse?
In all cases, anything to do with state law, which does vary, as you understand, across the various states, state law always supersedes anything that we say in our own policies.
You see, then, it would be a sensible proposition if I put to you that such mandatory reporting requirements, even though they're required as a matter of law, be recognised within the policy?
That's certainly the way we practice it anyway, so it'd be no problem to me.
It's not there expressed in words at all.
We'll consider that.
And similarly, in the flowchart on page 3, there is no diagram or indication of reporting to the Queensland Police Service or the Chief Executive of Child Safety. That seems to be an omission from the flowchart if there was a mandatory requirement.
Well, if we've missed it, we'll go back and have another look at that.
Thank you, Sister. Thank you, Your Honour. Those are my questions.
Mr. Kent.
Just before you rise, please, Mr. Kent, just some matters arising from Mr. Blunkett's questioning of you. I just want to understand a little more about the culture of the Sisters of Mercy during the time you were a sister. Did I understand you to say you've never used the cane personally?
Yes.
Can you remind me how long you were a teacher and a principal?
I think 68 is my first, 69 would be my first teaching year, I think.
And till when?
Oh, sorry.
Just
could
roughly.
I just have,
Just roughly. Would it be 20 years as a teacher and then a principal?
at least until 84 or so, 20 years certainly.
Were you aware on your own observations as a teacher and later as a principal of others using the cane?
Yes, male teachers in particular would use the cane.
And nuns?
Yes, at
And-
times, but not when I was principal, I don't think.
And when you were a principal, the nuns would be subject to your authority, wouldn't they?
I've never been a believer in corporal punishment for girls.
So
I didn't have a position on corporal punishment for boys.
can you help the Commission understand why you, as both a nun and later as a person of authority within the order, didn't indulge in excessive punishment and you didn't use the cane, and yet we've such strong reports, as had the Ford inquiry, of that practice occurring at Neerkol?
I think you'll find that those reports relate to earlier years on the whole. I'm not sure about all of them, but certainly predominantly they are of earlier years.
Yes, but in the time you were a nun, certainly in the early years, you were there nearly 2 decades before Neerkol closed, so you did overlap. Why was your attitude and your approach and those of the nuns who surrounded you in the education system so different to Neerkol?
I didn't myself ever receive any corporal punishment, and I didn't ever develop any feeling that it was a helpful thing to do.
But you were subject to vows of obedience, weren't you?
Yes.
So if the Mother Superior at Neerkol had used her vows to insist, or the vows to her, to insist that the other nuns did not use the cane at Neerkol, would they have obeyed her?
I would have thought so.
That still doesn't help me or the Commission understand why the culture you're outlining in your experience and your own personal practice appears to be so different from that of the Sisters of Mercy at Neerkol.
I'm not sure how I can be helpful here. It just isn't part of my experience at all, and I never developed any feeling that it was a useful thing to do.
And there were no rumours floating around at that time that the nuns at Neerkol were excessive in their punishment?
I don't remember it ever being raised. I certainly would have been aware when I was at school that there were schools in which kids received the cane, some of them Mercy schools, some of them other schools.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Kent.
Please, the Commission, we have no question.
Thank you. Ms. McGlinchey.
Thank you, Commissioner. Sister Loch, my name is McGlinchey and I appear for a number of survivors from their Neerkol experience. Sister, my questions are similar to the questions just put to you by the Commissioner, and I just want to phrase them in this way. Would it be right to assume that over the years, since the 90s, you have had the opportunity to give a great deal of thought to how this tragedy at Neerkol came about? Would I be right in assuming that?
Yes.
Do you accept that the sisters at Neerkol were some of the sisters, I should say, were very cruel to children?
I came to learn that, and some, not all.
And you do accept that now?
Yes, I do.
And I certainly do only say some sisters at Neerkol.
Yes.
All right. Are you able to assist the Commission on whether that cruelty was part of any kind of culture that you were aware of in your community? And I'm not talking about now, but a prior culture.
I don't believe it was ever a widespread culture. Perhaps it was among some people, but it certainly wasn't predominant in my experience, I suppose I've got to say.
Were there particular factors that you believe may have or did contribute to that cruelty at Neerkol?
This is supposition, right? I can't know it for certain, but there were very big numbers of children. There were very few staff. I would have thought that working out how to run that place was at times very difficult, and perhaps that resulted in people using corporal punishment much more than would have been desirable.
Thank you. Sister, I would like to ask you some questions about inquiries that were made around about 1993, and you've already given quite a lot of evidence to the Commission that once the press release, you became aware of the press release from AYC's book, you conducted some inquiries with ex-residents.
Yes.
And that the purpose of those inquiries was that you wanted to establish if anyone had knowledge or suspicion of abuse at Neerkol.
Yes.
All right. Now, are you able to tell us how many ex-residents you might have spoken to at that time?
I can't remember exactly, but probably about 6.
Were they people who you still had an association with?
Largely, yes.
All right. They were people who were still involved in the sisters or with the sisters in some form?
I think that'd be true. I didn't go out to the highways and the byways to find people, so they're probably people that either I had immediate contact with or some other sister had immediate contact with.
So could we assume from that that it's quite likely that they were ex-residents who had a positive experience at Neerkol?
That's probably true.
Could I just ask you to look at the list of names you have on the desk with the pseudonames? Could you just look at that list and tell the Commission if you made inquiries with any of those people?
I can tell you, no, I didn't.
You've been at the Commission hearings today and for several other days, and you've seen that there's a lot of ex-residents here, both in the hearing room and in the foyer. Did you consult or make inquiries with any of those people that you're aware of?
No. I don't think so.
Is that?
Don't think so.
All right. One of my clients in this matter is Mary Adams, who you may know as Mary Ether. You're aware of that ex-resident, and I assume you've had quite a deal to do with Mary over the years because she was involved in the support group.
Actually, I haven't.
All right.
It was more Sister Diane.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. But you know who I'm referring to?
Yes, I do.
All right.
Yes.
I'd like to suggest to you or put to you her knowledge of the matter involving AYC and the miscarriage. And then I would like to ask you if that information would have been of assistance to you in 1993.
Yes.
Now, Mary Adams and AYC were pretty good pals at Neerkol, and they still are now. I think they're sitting together in the hearing room. Right. Mary Adams tells me that there was an occasion where she threw AYC over in the course of a judo match, which was organised by the sisters. Okay? Right? AYC laid on the ground and she was in a lot of pain. She was there for some period when the sisters removed her and took her to one of the buildings, possibly the nursery. Right? AYC was then not seen at Neerkol for a number of months, right? And nobody really knew what had happened to her. Later, AYC told Mary that she'd been taken to the hospital and that she hadn't known that she was pregnant, but she found out later that she had been pregnant and that she had miscarried. Now, that is information that I suggest would have been very useful to you in 9.
Yes, indeed.
Ronna, just before my sister Loch says that, could it be noted that none of that evidence, none of those issues are in evidence, and it can't really be brought into evidence in the way of asking Sister Loch whether that would have been useful information? Certainly those facts haven't been established.
Yes, well, that's noted, Ms Needham. But I'll allow you to proceed with the purpose of the question.
Thank you. Sister, I asked you, and I think you went to answer, on whether that information would have been useful to you in 1993.
Yes, it would have.
Do you think if you had that information in 1993 that you would have taken a more sympathetic or compassionate approach to AYC?
I can't be sure, but it certainly would have helped my knowledge.
Do you think it may have prompted you to speak directly to AYC?
Look, I'm not certain of that because I don't think I had enough understanding of what I might or might not do with information at that time.
Are you able to say now which sisters you made inquiries with?
Not with any accuracy, but probably all of those that I could readily talk
Have
with.
access to?
Yes.
So that would be sisters who were still involved with the congregation at that time?
Yes.
All right. And again, you didn't go to the highways and byways to seek out information?
Yes.
All right. Do you know whether you spoke to Mary, Sister Mary St Pius?
Yes, I did.
All right. Thank you. Did she disclose to you that she had any knowledge or heard any rumours or suspicions of abuse at Neerkol?
Of physical abuse, she would have said she considered sometimes that excessive use had been made, but not of sexual abuse.
I'm sorry, I cut you off. Do you recall the details of the excessive use of discipline, physical discipline?
Not at this stage, I don't know.
Just that. And was she talking from her own observation or from rumour or suspicion?
It was her own opinion.
Her opinion because she had been a sister at Neerkol?
Yes.
Okay. Sister, I just want to ask you a few questions which follow on from my friend's questions about the use of the presbytery by the church. Now, it's the case, isn't it, that the presbytery was located in the Neerkol grounds, right, and that the church nominated the priest to live in the presbytery?
The bishop did, yes.
Yes, the
Bishop
bishop.
appointed
Right.
the parish
The sisters
priest.
certainly didn't have any choice in that matter. Somebody would just be nominated by the bishop and they would live there.
Yes.
All right. It appears from the evidence, and please tell me if I'm wrong, that there was a great deal of interaction between the priest in the presbytery and the staff and the children at the orphanage. Do you agree with that?
Yes, I do.
All right. For instance, the priest was served his meals by the children.
I'm sorry, that's the way it's reported, and that's probably true. I do not know it for myself.
All right. Well, my instructions are that the children often took meals to the presbytery. Right. They washed the priest's clothes. For the boys, served as altar boys, and they cleaned the presbytery. Is that consistent with your understanding, or you just don't know?
I don't really know, but I'm not in any way saying that that wouldn't have happened.
Certainly the presbytery afforded fairly unfettered access to the children by the priests.
It was immediately behind the chapel, and children would be passing by regularly and frequently, yes.
And there was no restrictions on the children going into the presbytery, was there? Unless the priest didn't allow it.
Sorry, I can't actually tell you that.
All right. Okay. You now know quite a lot about child sexual abuse that you've learnt over the years. Would you agree that providing unfettered access to children was really an invitation to abuse?
I think it sometimes resulted in abuse, and I'm very regretful of that.
We know of 3 allegations of priests living in the presbytery, and I'm including Father Johns, who attempted to rape Mary Adams, right, who wasn't able to be identified. Right. So we know of 3 priests who lived there who have sexually abused children. And my question is this: would you agree that that situation appears to have been a very attractive prospect to live in the presbytery to priests who perhaps were pedophiles?
In retrospect, I don't know that. I can't.
Yes.
Thank you, Commissioner. I'll move on. I want to ask you some questions about the makeup of the Professional Standards Committee. Now, it was established in 1997, and from your just a few matters in your statement, that it was made up by us, the personnel or the committee members were a social worker, some sisters, a nurse, counsellors and a solicitor. With the exception of the solicitor, were they all religious members of the church or the congregation?
No, only 2, I think. Sister Anne and myself, I think, were the only 2.
And where,
Yes, that's right.
Where did the other committee members come from? What was their background? I know their training, but...
The nurse was either the head of nursing or the deputy at the Mater Hospital. The solicitor, I think I've said there, was from one of the local firms, but not a firm that did work for the sisters. The social worker was a person who had been employed at Centre Care and who was by then partly on our payroll. Yes.
So would it be right in assuming that they were all people who were associated with the Catholic Church in some way?
Yes.
Okay. Now, you have said that...
I'm sorry, I'll have to revise that. I can't really remember if the solicitor was a Catholic or not.
Did the solicitor play much of a role in the committee?
Oh, yes, yes.
Okay. Did he provide legal advice when required?
Not as a legal advisor, but as a person aware of the legal implications of any action we might take, because we wish to be very careful not to interfere with any official investigations that might have been happening. We didn't want to overstep the bounds. There was not much experience in how to do this, and we just needed to be careful that we weren't doing it wrongly.
You had access to an investigator, and I think that that was a Mr. Barry O'Brien.
Yes.
What was Mr. O'Brien's background?
I don't actually remember now. I've got a feeling he was a former policeman, but I'm not sure.
Did you call upon his services very often?
Not in my time, no.
All right. At all? Not at all?
There was a proposal to do so. I don't actually know whether that happened or not.
Sister, just in relation to investigation of these matters or undertaking the role of the Professional Standards Committee, can I suggest to you, and you disagree with me if you like, that by 1996 there was a great wealth of information in the community about how to respond to child abuse allegations and how to investigate them. And of course, in investigation, well, you had some very expert investigators just down the road at the Rockhampton Police Station. You could have called upon their expertise. Did you ever do that? I'm not.
No, there are at least 3 questions.
Yes, there are.
I'll break it up. Sister, in the task of learning how to assess and investigate these matters, did you ever call upon the police to perhaps act as a liaison officer or to have representation on the committee?
No, we didn't.
Did you ever go to outside organisations such as the welfare organisations or family and community services to ask for their representation?
Centre Care we did, not others.
Right. Centre Care, can you just tell me what that organisation is?
I think I'd just describe it briefly as a Catholic welfare centre.
Sister, you clearly struggled with putting protocols and guidelines in place, right?
Indeed.
You have said that none of the people involved had a great deal of experience, and I'm just wondering why you felt you needed to reinvent the wheel, why you wouldn't have gone to the community and sought expert advice.
Your Honour, I object to that. That assumes, without any basis, that there was a wheel already invented. My learned friend has said so, but that doesn't make it so. Perhaps you should start by asking Sister Berneice what she knew about the information out there in the mid-90s and then see whether she can move on from there.
Well, Commissioner, I think the problem is with that is that I don't know whether the sister is in a position to say what was out there, because I think that she has said she didn't go to outside organisations.
Are you in a position to put directly to Sister Loch what agencies or expertise were available at that time?
Only in a general sense, Your Honour. I think I can say that there was a police station in Rockhampton, and I think I can say that there was a Department of Community Services which covered all of Queensland. And I don't think it's a great step, or into the unknown.
There are 2 agencies
yes,
that you can put directly to Sister Loch, and then in such a way that it
Am I right?
makes it clear what Sister's answering.
I'm sorry. Sister, would you like me to put those 2 individual questions to you?
Yes.
All right. Did you ask the police for their expert advice on how they should go about, or how your committee should go about investigating allegations of abuse?
No.
All right. Did you contact the Department of Community Services and ask for their expert advice on how to handle allegations of sexual abuse?
No.
Thank you. Just briefly on your engagement with Dr. Grant, Was Dr. Grant a doctor in divinity, or did he have some other qualification?
He was a doctor of psychology.
Thank you. All right. In your training that you undertook with Dr. Grant, did he undertake training in the types of consequences or effects that you may see as a result of child sexual abuse?
He certainly did some of that work.
And did some of those effects include the possibility of mental illness?
I can't remember specifically, but I'd be quite sure that would have come into it somewhere.
What about the difficulties that some victims of sexual abuse have in establishing trusting personal relationships? Do you recall that at all?
Yes, I do. Mm-hmm.
Difficulties in attaining educational milestones?
Again, I don't remember that specifically, but he did give quite a wide range of examples of what you might look for.
Do you recall whether there was any conversation or any parts of your training which involved the need to provide compensation to assist victims of sexual abuse to provide for themselves and to get some degree of financial stability? Was there any consideration of that?
That's certainly consistent with the sort of advice that he gave, yes. Mm.
Sister, just some questions about the process of assessing the calls that came in after the 60 Minutes program. I believe that was on the 14th of April 1997.
I think that's right.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And you've said in your statement that within a couple of days after that program, there was about 110 calls to the hotline.
Yes.
And so I just want to ask you, who staffed those phones?
We used some of our own staff. We diverted to that, and we had to get in a few people to help us to make sure that we could deal with them.
From within your congregation?
A couple were sisters, a couple were other people.
What details were sought from the people who called?
I can't now recall, but it was quite basic. It was along the lines of where can we get back to you, that contact sort of thing, and whether people were ringing out of their Neerkol experience or perhaps they'd been at... Why did they ring us? See, some of them were calls from other orphanages. Some of them were people ringing up with support. Some people were ringing up to say they were protesting about something. We needed just that sort of basic information because we undertook to get back to them within a certain amount of time, and I don't actually remember what that amount of time was. It was a week or a fortnight, but it was a short amount of time.
All right. So at that point, am I correct in assuming that you did not record if an allegation of sexual abuse against a particular priest or employee of the church was made? You didn't record that information?
I'm sorry, I'd have to go back and have a look.
I think in your statement that you said you just recorded the date of admission and the date of leaving the institution. Can you tell me why?
Yes.
Why you wouldn't have, at that point of somebody making a first contact with you, want to get as much information from them as you could?
Oh, well, we did. We welcomed as much information as we could. But I can't just remember exactly what that information was. We wouldn't have refused any disclosure that came our way at that point, that's for sure.
Have you collected those records, or are they still available?
If they are, they're in the documents that we've given to the Royal Commission.
Do you recall now whether any specific allegations against priests associated with Neerkol were made?
I don't recall, but there probably were.
Do you recall doing a follow-up interview with 60 Minutes?
No, I didn't.
Do you recall any of the sisters doing a follow-up interview?
Yes.
And do you recall
I
that
think so anyway. Yes, no, I know that. Yes, I do.
Do you recall that, I didn't see the program, but do you
I didn't
recall
either.
that details were given of the results of those hotline calls? Do you recall that?
No, I don't.
All right. Do you recall whether at the end of that process, the assessment of the taking of the calls and the assessment of the calls, you ended up with any new allegations of sexual abuse against a specific priest?
I don't actually, no.
You don't know? Or you
New
don't think so?
allegations against...
Anything you didn't know before?
Oh, yes, certainly. Yes.
All right. Can you remember what they were?
No, I can't remember details, but I do know that there were allegations we hadn't heard before.
All right. Against specific priests or teachers or, against workers?
Look, I'm sorry. I'd have to go back and look at information. I don't know that we heard allegations against any people that we hadn't heard about before. I think that's... Look, I better stop because I'm not certain of what I'm saying.
I don't have many more areas for you, sister. I know you've been in the witness box all day. I just want to ask you some questions about... I'll just go back to that other area. As a matter of process, I know you don't remember details, but would the process have been all of those matters would have been responded to and passed to the professional standards?
Yes, definitely. That was the purpose of the exercise.
All right. And they're all the matters that related to Neerkol, and matters that didn't were diverted to a more appropriate path. Is that correct?
We responded to every call that required any kind of response. If it was for an institution other than our own, then we definitely got the details such as who they should ring, that sort of thing, or whatever they needed to know.
Now, from quite early in the piece, and around about the mid-90s, the sisters recognised that there would be compensation claims made and that they may require the sale of the property at Neerkol.
Mid-90s? No, I don't think so.
All right. Do you recall when it was first raised that the property at Neerkol might need to be sold to provide support and compensation?
It wasn't during my time as leader.
No conversations at all in your time?
Not that I recall.
All right. The property at Neerkol was ultimately sold in 2000. Were you involved at all in the sale of that property?
No, I was not.
All right. Were you involved in the procuring of a loan to fund compensation?
No.
All right, thank you. Just a few questions. Other than the property at Neerkol, did your congregation own any other property?
Yes.
What properties were they?
I don't have that immediately to hand, but we owned things like, at that stage, we owned the Mater hospitals, schools. No, I don't think we had any schools at that stage, but we owned houses in which sisters lived, property at the Range College, that sort of thing. So,
in the Rockhampton area?
Rockhampton, the whole of the diocese, Bundaberg, Mackay would be the main centres, but other places as well.
Approximately how many houses?
Sorry, I'd be guessing.
And are all of those properties now, other than Neerkol, which has been sold, are they all now the property of the new organisation?
Not all of those that there would have been at that time.
Or any of those properties transferred into other entities in the time that you were involved?
Such as
Trusts or to other parts of the Catholic Church? Are you aware of any property transfers?
of the major ministries, yes, but that's quite a while afterwards.
I'm sorry?
That's quite a while after these
When
settlements.
when you say the major ministries, what do you mean?
Martyr hospitals, aged care places, they passed from the governance of the institute, well, it wasn't the institute, then it was the congregation. They passed from the congregation to other people to operate, other church bodies to operate.
All right. Can you give me an example? Are you talking about the Martyr Hospital? That did that transfer out of ownership to another entity?
Yes, it went to Mercy Partners.
I'm sorry?
It went to Mercy Partners.
Was it sold or gifted or?
It was gifted. Gifted with a mortgage kind of a consideration as well.
And when was that transfer effected?
2011.
Any other properties that were transferred out of the congregation's control?
Health and aged care.
And what is that? Is that
All of the health and aged care went to Mercy Partners.
And what, okay, did that include?
There were at that stage 5 hospitals and 3 aged care sites.
What year were they transferred? Oh, well, as part of the package?
Yes.
Any properties sold?
There would only be, say, a house that we no longer used or something like that. No major ones.
Thank you. Now, Ms Needham, it's 4:10.
Yes,
I'm
I
sure
will
that
be some little time. I don't know if my friend Mr Lloyd.
I don't know.
I will be some little time with Sister Berneice, and my application would be that part of the evidence be taken tomorrow. I know there was an indication that we would sit until Sister Berneice was finished, but she has been in the witness box all day. It's already 4:10, and it would seem appropriate.
perhaps we can resolve this by recommencing at 9:30 and getting some extra time in that way.
Suitable.
Ms Needham,
15 now.
I'm indebted to you, Your Honour, and to the Commissioners.
you happy with that?
Sorry.
We could do 15 now. It's up to her. It's really.
Commissioner Murray's just indicating to me that would it be possible for you to answer questions from Ms Needham for another 15 minutes to get us through to 4:30? Are you feeling fatigued by the day?
Definitely, but I'll still go on if you want me to.
So you comfortable about proceeding until 4:30?
If Miss Needham is, yes.
Oh, don't worry about me, Sister Berneice. I'm more worried about you. Are you
Yes,
okay to
okay.
continue? So is that 10 minutes? Is it?
15 minutes till
for our
4:30.
Thank you. Excuse me one moment. Now, Sister Berneice, you were asked a number of questions, and I'll try and draw your attention to the questions which you were asked, but I may not be able to. If you don't remember them, please let me know, and I'll try and be more specific. Now, you asked some questions both by counsel assisting and by Mr. Kernaghan about the press releases which were prepared in 1993 and then 1995, amended in 1995. And you were asked a number of questions about the way in which those press releases were amended. Now, you'll recall that one of the descriptions given of those press releases was that the amendments were tinkering with them. Would you accept that description as appropriate?
No, I see them more as a rewrite or fresh start drawing on older material.
Now, my learned friend Mr Kernaghan took you to a number of sentences within those press releases, and in particular, the one dealing with it's only natural that a legacy of parental deprivation would leave some former residents bitter and resentful. You recall those questions? The next sentence, and perhaps the sister could be shown tab 56 on the screen. That sentence did not change in the various versions, did it?
I don't think so.
But the next sentence in the second paragraph of tab 56 is a new sentence, is it not? Which is, where the actions of a sister or any other responsible person associated with Neerkol has caused harm to the children, there is particularly deep regret on the part of the sisters. Do you agree that that was an addition?
Yes, it was.
September 97? Sorry, 95. The next substantive amendment was the removal of the sentence about extensive inquiries having found a lack of substantiation. Do you agree with that?
Yes.
That that's not in this latest version?
Yes, that's true.
And then the next part of the last full paragraph, commencing allegations, is an acknowledgement that the allegations were of abuse by a priest and neglect by those in authority, which would mean, inter alia, the sisters, would it not?
Yes, it would.
Of the children in their care. And that, again, was indicative of the change in your thinking from 1993 to 1995. Is that correct?
It would be, yes.
And finally, the sentence, the last substantive sentence, is one which is new in 1995, and that is the sisters will do all they can to ensure justice to all concerned. Do you agree? And again, does that reflect the development in your thinking from 1993 to 1995?
Yes, it was very much an ongoing process.
Now, the original press release was, you've given evidence, sought by reference to Father Lucas, who had some experience with the media. Is that right?
Yes, that's right.
Did you or your congregation have any such experience at that time?
Oh, no, none at all.
And one of the things that you sent to Father Lucas were copies of the media articles which related to things such as babies being buried in lime pits and and allegations of that type. Do you recall that?
Yes, I do.
And to the best of your knowledge, looking at the earlier press release, or remembering the early press release because it's not there, did that inform the terms of the original press release in 1993?
Yes, that was the original press release was at the time of those particular types of allegations being around.
Now, you were asked, moving on to another topic, you were asked about the defence of the proceedings which were on foot, and in paragraph 55 of your statement, perhaps that could be put up on the screen, you referred to your letter to the sisters after those proceedings had been finalised. And you said to the sisters, our difficulty in dealing with the justice issue, which would be there for the claimants if there is any foundation for their complaint, remains, and it is hard to know how to get answers to such questions. Now, looking at that extract from your letter to the sisters, were you of the view that the litigation, which had been subject to the refusal of the extension of the limitation period, were you of the view that that finalised all the issues between the complainants and the sisters?
No, I didn't. I was still concerned that the mere fact that it was not going to go to court didn't actually resolve anything.
You suggest in your paragraph 56 that the question of justice remained unresolved. And what did you mean by that?
Well, I felt that if there had been offence, throwing it out of court was not any kind of delivery of justice, so it still had to be addressed. If it was correct, it had to be addressed. And if it was not correct, I thought it still had to be addressed. I just didn't know how court was going to help when all of the people who might have been able to speak to the immediate situation, apart from the claimants and people of that era, were actually not available.
And in your statement, you say that the legal process doesn't always yield the results that people want, let alone healing. Were you thinking of issues of healing at that point?
Oh, definitely, yes.
And that was in March 1996. And at that point, you had your discussion with Bishop Heenan, is that right?
Yes.
And not long after that, you contacted Mr. Owen. Perhaps I'll take you to the relevant document. Para 45 of your statement. I'm sorry, I've said that you contacted Mr. Owen. That's incorrect. I'll withdraw that. And paragraph 45 of your statement, you say on the 20th of September 1995, you wrote a letter to McCabe Brown. Now, perhaps if the document CTJH 202 02 006 0285 could be brought up. Now, this is a letter of the 25th of September, and there is a version of this letter under tab 54, but this is one I've asked to be brought up, has your handwriting on it. Now, just before that comes up, the fourth paragraph of that letter reads, "If it would be helpful to Mr. Owen, I am certainly prepared to offer pastoral support and am available to discuss this matter. However, I am unsure of what you have in mind as a way to proceed." And that was written to Mr. Karp, he was the solicitor for Mr. Owen, is that correct?
Yes, he was, yes.
And if and when the document comes up on the screen, you have a handwritten note that you sent copies to John Shaw, and he was your solicitor, is that right?
He was the diocesan solicitor. I think he might have been acting for us originally in this matter, as well as the diocese.
The next person to whom you sent that letter was John Grace, and that's Father Grace, the Vicar General of
yes.
Of the diocese, and Laurie Rolls of CCI. You're nodding, is that correct?
Yes, sorry. Yes.
And you also sent it on the 2nd of September to Minter Ellison, is that right?
Yes.
Now, okay, the document now up has your handwritten notes.
Yes.
And the copy I have also has Minter Ellison written on it, so I must have a third copy. So, you can... Anyway, perhaps we'll work out that document issue. It's a slightly different document. But that indicated your willingness to meet Mr. Owen, despite the fact that legal proceedings were contemplated at that point.
Yes, certainly.
And what did you envisage by way of the pastoral support to be offered to him at any such meeting?
I certainly was willing to provide some measure of counselling if that was thought to be helpful or appropriate. And certainly I was willing to meet with him myself if that was thought to be helpful.
You're not suggesting that you would provide the counselling, but you would provide or enable a
We
referral
would.
to a counsellor, is that right?
Yes, we would fund counselling.
Now, you received a letter at some point refusing that offer of pastoral support, is that right?
Yes.
However, there was a meeting with Mr Owen in March 1997, and you were
Yes.
taken to that, the note of that meeting by my learned friend, Ms Wosley.
Yes.
And you noted at that point in that note that the protocols at the time required a meeting, or not required but mandated a meeting with the resource coordinator rather than the leader of the church authority, is that right?
That's right.
And March 1997, what protocols would they be? That would be
I
towards
think
healing.
we're still under the... look, it's a bit borderline. It's either the 1994 sexual abuse ones, or we might be into towards healing.
Might just have trickled into towards healing at that point.
Yes.
But in any event, you, as the leader of the church authority at that point, met with Mr Owen.
Yes.
And with Ms Carrick, who was from the Brisbane Professional Standards Office.
Yes.
And you said, I think in evidence, that the effect that meeting had on you was quite a powerful one. Is that right?
Yes.
Can you explain to the Commission the effect that meeting a survivor for what appeared to be an extensive meeting, and that note is now on the screen, had on you and your thinking from that point?
Yes, it was a very moving meeting for me. I suppose I anticipated that Dave would be very antagonistic. And perhaps he was when he first walked into the room, but he was obviously also open to talking. I was open to talking with him. I found as he talked about his experience that I just found myself reaching back in time, really, to the little boy who had been hurt.
And was that a revelation to you?
Yes, it was.
That an adult would have such a reaction to the retelling of his abuse?
Yes, it was hard.
And
Very hard for him.
yes.
And it was hard for me to hear too.
And when you say you thought he might have been antagonistic, are you saying that in any way which might attribute blame to him for that?
No, just simply that if he had experienced the traumatic abuse that he had related into his accounts, I suppose my anticipation was of somebody who was going to be antagonistic. That really wasn't my experience. And
he had passed on to you before you met him that he had said, I hope she won't be carrying a big stick, is that right? And your promise to him was just to listen.
Yes.
And does that have any effect, that promise to him, have any effect on how you expressed yourself at that meeting?
I tried to do just that, just to listen.
Now, moving on to another person who had made complaints sort of early on, AYP, if you want to look at that list, you know who that is. Now,
Yes.
was it your understanding that when AYP made her complaint, or shortly thereafter, she was being afforded pastoral support from her local professional standards office, which was in Western Australia?
Yes, it was in West Australia. We knew that they had provision. Sorry, when I say we, I mean the Bishop and I both had knowledge that they had provision for the for people dealing with professional standards matters. And so it had been our understanding that, well, no, we actually asked for them to respond to her.
And as far as you're aware, and at this remove, are you aware whether that was offered to her?
I feel quite sure it was, because I actually ended up going to West Australia myself to visit with her, and so I spoke at the time to people who had been part of that response.
And you offered to visit her in April 97, is that right? And the visit came about, is that right? And the visit came about in May 1997?
Yes.
And at that visit in May 97, did you offer follow-up contact from the response coordinator for the sisters?
I don't specifically remember doing that, but it would have been part of our process by then.
Now, one of the things you did in response to AYP's complaint was that you spoke early on to Sister Frances Regis, who was one of the people who she had named in her complaint.
Yes, she
and
did.
who was still alive.
Yes.
Now, I think you said that Sister Frances Regis did not remember the allegations made by AYP, and that was passed on to AYP.
Mm-hmm.
Are you aware that later, in August 1998, and please say if you weren't aware at the time, that Sister Frances Regis later apologised to AYP in writing?
No, I wasn't aware of that.
About to move on to something a bit
Oh, yes.
more
All right.
substantial.
We'll break now until 9:30.
Thank you.
9:30 tomorrow morning.